Hello everyone, and welcome to Anomalous Archive, where we post scary stories to help you sleep. Please comment where you are listening to my videos from, since I believe it would be fun for all of us to know. Also, please don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's reach 50 subscribers until the end of this month. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. The ski camp was the highlight of the year. The students had been waiting for weeks to finally leave everyday life behind and head to the snowy mountains. Daniel Collins, the undisputed class clown, had already set the mood during the bus ride. Whether with bad jokes or small pranks, he was never short of ideas. But not everyone appreciated his humor. When they finally arrived, the mountain world was shrouded in an eerie silence. The sky was gray, and the tips of the fir trees rose like black needles from the endless white. Amelia Carter, the group leader of the 5 students, looked at the clouds skeptically. "A snowstorm is coming," she murmured. But Mr. Edwards, the experienced camp leader, waved it off. "The weather changes quickly here. No reason to worry. But stay in your groups." Daniel rolled his eyes. "Sure, like in a horror movie. Stay together so you can all get scared at once. Who's afraid of a little snow?" The others laughed, but Amelia felt a lump in her throat. It wasn't just the weather. Something felt wrong. The groups were divided, and Daniel, Amelia, Lucas Miller, Sophie Wilson, and Lucy Bennett ended up together. Their task was to ski down and explore the upper slope. "Let's get started," shouted Daniel, racing down the hill before anyone could protest. At first, the ride was a dream. The snow was fresh, the air clear and cool. But after half an hour, the wind grew stronger. Snowflakes whirled like little daggers through the air. "We should turn back," Amelia shouted over the howling wind. But Daniel had other plans. "Over there, do you see that?" He pointed to a shadow in the mist. It was a building, old and abandoned. A mountain house that looked as if it hadn't seen a visitor in decades. The windows were broken, and the entrance was half open. "Cool, a shelter," Daniel exclaimed enthusiastically. Amelia was skeptical. "That doesn't look safe." But when the first snow squalls hit them, there was no choice. "Just for a moment," she added, leading the group inside. The interior was no better. The floor creaked under their steps, and dust swirled through the air. A musty smell, like wet wood and something she couldn't identify, hung in the air. "Welcome to the luxury resort," joked Daniel as he sat down on an old chair. But his words echoed strangely, as if the walls absorbed and then threw them back. Outside, the storm raged, and the visibility vanished into the white. "We'll stay here until it calms down," Amelia decided. But Sophie, who had discovered an old photo above the fireplace, spoke quietly. "Look at this." It was a group photo, presumably of the original inhabitants of the mountain house. But someone had crossed out the faces, all except one. A man in a white coat was smiling directly at the camera. "This is strange," Lucy whispered. "What?" Daniel took the photo and held it up. "Come on, guys. This is a joke, maybe from other skiers." But the unease grew, and outside the wind howled like a warning. Daniel swung the photo like a trophy. Maybe this is an abandoned party hut, or the crew from the last ski camp was really creative. His voice sounded relaxed, but his eyes kept returning to the picture. The man in the white coat seemed to be smiling, a little too wide, a little too stiff. Amelia took it from his hand and placed it back on the mantel. "Stop that," she said sharply. "We don't know who this belongs to. It's not our house." "Yes, sure, Mum," Daniel teased her. But before he could make another joke, a gust of wind slammed against the walls of the mountain house. The door slammed shut, and the group jumped. "Calm down," said Lucas, who saw the situation more rationally. "The wind is strong, that's all. We should check if there's another room here. It's better if we get the fireplace going before we freeze to death." The group slowly began to look around the mountain house. The ground floor wasn't big. A living room with an old sofa and the fireplace, a tiny kitchen that was completely trashed, and a staircase leading to a dark upper floor. "I'll go upstairs," Daniel said, without waiting for a response. Amelia wanted to stop him, but he just grinned. "What's going to happen? I'll definitely find a few ghosts to make us hot chocolate." His steps creaked on the wooden stairs, and soon he disappeared into the shadow of the upper hallway. "Daniel, be careful," Lucy called after him, but her voice was lost in the roar of the storm. In the living room, Lucas and Sophie tried to start the fire. "The wood is damp," murmured Sophie. "I don't know if we'll manage." Lucas frowned. "It has to work. Without fire." He looked at the broken windows, through which the cold was relentlessly seeping in. At that moment, they heard a noise from above, a dull thud, followed by a short, loud bang. "Daniel," Amelia called, rushing to the stairs. No answer. The silence that followed was suffocating. Outside, the storm howled. Inside, it felt like time had stopped. "Daniel," she called again, this time louder. Suddenly, footsteps hit the stairs. Daniel came down, his cheeks red, grinning. "You won't believe it. There's even more old stuff upstairs." A bit creepy, but super interesting. Amelia sighed with relief, but she couldn't shake off her tension. "Next time, let us know when you're sneaking around. I thought something happened to you." "The only thing that happened to me was boredom," Daniel replied, flopping onto the sofa. But there was something in his gaze that he didn't say. The snowstorm raged on relentlessly, and the howling of the wind swallowed every sound that the students could hear from outside. It was as if the world had forgotten them. The mountain hut was a shelter, but it felt more like a trap. The cold crept through the cracks in the windows, and the gloomy corners of the room seemed to reveal something hidden at any moment. "We should search the house," said Amelia determinedly. "There must be something useful, or at least a safe place to sleep." Lucas nodded and took a flashlight out of his backpack. "I'll check the kitchen. Maybe there are still supplies." "I'll come with you," said Sophie hesitantly. "But if a rat is running around, I'm out." Daniel raised his hand without looking up. "I'll stay here." The couch and I just became friends. Lucy, who had remained silent in the background until then, threw him a nervous glance. "I think I'll stay here too. The house feels somehow wrong." "Then at least come with us when we check the upstairs," said Amelia sternly. She wouldn't let Daniel's nonchalance get to her. Something was off with this place, and she didn't want the group to spread out any further. Reluctantly, Daniel got up. "Fine, but if there's anything crawling up there, you can have the hero's deed." The steps of the old wooden staircase creaked under their weight. Once upstairs, they found a narrow hallway lined with 3 doors. The first door led to a bedroom, which was covered in a thick layer of dust. A bed frame stood in the corner. Above it hung a wooden cross, crookedly attached to the wall. "How inviting," muttered Daniel, though his grin seemed forced this time. Amelia shone the flashlight on the walls. "That looks like bloodstains," she said softly. Daniel stepped closer, but when he touched the wall, the red stain crumbled into dust. "Just old paint. You're really paranoid." The second door led to a bathroom, its mirror shattered. Shards lay on the floor, and a black, sticky film had settled in the bathtub. Amelia turned around before she could look closer. "Just one more door," she said, forcing herself to stay calm. The last room was empty, except for a chair standing in the middle of the room. A single candle, long extinguished, was stuck to the floor next to it. Daniel laughed nervously. "Okay, this is the point in every horror movie where everyone says, 'Let's get out of here.' Maybe we should do just that." "We'll go downstairs soon," said Lucy, her voice trembling. However, Amelia felt drawn to something in this room. She stepped closer to the chair. Something was carved into the backrest, a symbol that looked like a spiral with arrows. "What does this mean?" she asked aloud, but no one answered. Daniel looked around. then furrowed his brow. "Did you hear that?" "Heard what?" asked Amelia. "A knocking." It knocked from the outside. The group froze. Lucy stepped back, her hands pressed over her mouth. "That's impossible," she whispered. "It was nothing," said Amelia quickly, trying to maintain control. "Maybe just a branch hitting the wall. Let's go back to the living room." She turned around and suddenly felt her neck hairs stand on end. It felt like she was being watched. Down in the living room, the mood wasn't any better. Lucas and Sophie had searched the kitchen, but aside from a few old, rusted cans, there was nothing to be found. The fireplace burned weakly, but the flames cast strange shadows on the walls. "Did you find anything?" asked Lucas as the others returned. "Just a lot of creepy stuff," said Daniel, collapsing back onto the couch, but his grin was gone. Amelia hesitated for a moment before replying. There was nothing important, just a few old pieces of furniture. She didn't want to unnecessarily frighten the others. Sophie looked at her suspiciously. "You're hiding something. What happened up there?" Before Amelia could answer, there was a knock, loud and clear, this time from the door of the mountain hut. The group jumped, and the air seemed to stand still. That's the wind, right?" stammered Lucy. "That wasn't wind," whispered Lucas. Amelia stepped toward the door, her heart racing. "Hello," she called, but there was no answer. Another knock followed, this time slower, like a rhythmic thud that echoed deep in their bones. "Don't open it," whispered Lucy, grabbing Amelia's arm. "We need to know what's out there," said Amelia, though her voice trembled. With a hesitant motion, she unlocked the door and pulled it open. A freezing gust of wind hit her, and she peered into the darkness. But there was nothing. No person, no animal, only the endless, roaring white storm. When she wanted to close the door, she noticed something directly in front of the threshold, a single object in the snow. An old wooden pipe, shining as if it were new. The storm had completely enclosed the mountain house by now. The windows were covered by a thick layer of snow, and the world outside seemed as if it had ceased to exist. The only hint that there was still an outside was the relentless howling of the wind, which was seeping through the cracks of the building. Amelia stared at the wooden pipe in her hand. It was remarkably well preserved, despite the age suggested by its style and craftsmanship. "Who would just place something like this in front of the door?" she muttered. "Maybe a ghost," Daniel said dryly, leaning back as if it were all a bad joke. Lucas took the pipe from her and examined it. "Looks hand-carved," he said. "Pretty old. But why does it shine like that?" "Put it down," Lucy said hastily. "This is not a good sign." "It's just a pipe," Lucas replied. "You're all freaking out." But as he placed it on the table, the room seemed to grow colder. Sophie pulled her jacket tighter around her. "Do you hear that?" They all listened. The knocking had stopped, but something else had replaced it. A faint whistling, as if the wind were playing a melody. It came from everywhere and nowhere at once. "That's just the storm," Lucas said, but even he didn't sound convinced. "Sure," Daniel said. "It's always the storm until one of us is missing." His joke didn't make anyone laugh. Amelia stepped in front of the fireplace and tried to calm the group. "Listen, we stay here together. No one leaves the house until the storm is over, no matter what we hear." "And what if the storm lasts for days?" Lucy asked, her voice trembling. Then we wait," Amelia said, but even she knew how little that helped. The first night in the mountain house was the longest they had ever experienced. No one slept. They sat huddled together in front of the fireplace, while the flames flickered and cast shadows on the walls that seemed to move. Daniel was the first to break the silence. "It's weird, right? The 5 of us trapped here, in the middle of a storm that won't let us out. Maybe this was all planned." "Stop it," Amelia hissed. "No, seriously." Daniel leaned forward, his eyes sparkling in the firelight. "Quick break before we continue. Did you know that over 90% of you who are listening right now Haven't subscribed to the channel yet? If you like my creepy stories, don't miss out in the future and subscribe now for free. It only takes a moment and helps me tremendously in continuing to create creepy stories for you. Thanks for your support. And now, back to the story. What if this house wasn't randomly here? What if it wanted us? You're not helpful, Lucas said. And what about the knocking? Daniel wasn't deterred. Nobody talks about it. Who or what made that sound? Lucy began to cry, softly and shakily. Stop, Daniel, please. But before anyone could say anything, the fireplace suddenly went out. The fire was gone, as if an invisible hand had been placed upon it. The room was immediately enveloped in darkness, and the cold hit them like a physical blow. Amelia fumbled for her flashlight, while the others murmured frantically. A sudden, loud bang made them all fall silent. It came from above, a heavy noise, as if a piece of furniture had been pushed across the floor. Someone's up there, Sophie whispered. That's impossible, Lucas said, but his hands trembled as he fished a candle out of his backpack and lit it. The faint light seemed to make the shadows even more vivid. We should check, Amelia said finally. You're crazy, Lucy replied immediately. We stay here. If someone's up there, I don't want to know who or what, Daniel added. But this time there was no mockery in his voice. The group split up. Amelia, Lucas, and Daniel decided to go upstairs, while Lucy and Sophie stayed in the living room. Come back if anything feels off, Lucy pleaded. Stay downstairs and make no noise, Amelia said. The stairs creaked under their steps, and the hallway above was in complete darkness. Lucas held the candle, but the flickering light made the outlines of the doors appear eerie. What was that sound? Daniel whispered. Maybe an animal, Lucas said, but his expression said otherwise. Or the wind, Amelia added. They went to the last door, the room with the chair. When they opened the door, they gasped. The chair was no longer in the center of the room. It was now directly in front of them, as if it were waiting for them. Okay, this is not normal, Daniel said quietly. This is nothing, Amelia said, though she didn't believe it herself. She slowly stepped inside while Lucas held the candle. There is nothing, she said finally. But as she turned around, her gaze fell on the wall. The symbol, the spiral, was gone. Instead, something new was carved. One of you must pay. Lucas stumbled back, almost dropping the candle. Daniel stared at the words as if he couldn't understand them. What does that mean? It wants to scare us, said Amelia, but her voice trembled. A sudden scream from the living room made them jump. Lucy or Sophie? They ran without hesitation. When Amelia, Lucas, and Daniel stormed back into the living room, they found Lucy and Sophie huddled together in a corner. The candle that Lucas had left on the table had fallen over, and the room was filled with an even deeper darkness that seemed to barely be penetrated by the flashlight. What happened? Amelia shouted as she aimed her lamp at the two. Sophie shakily raised her hand and pointed at the wall above the fireplace. There was something. Something? What do you mean? Lucas asked. It moved, whispered Lucy, clutching Sophie's arm. In the shadow. We saw it. Daniel snapped. Maybe it was your own reflection. You two are slowly losing it. It wasn't a reflection. Sophie suddenly shouted, her eyes wide with fear. It pointed at us. Amelia's heart raced. She wanted to say something reassuring, but she didn't know how. Instead, she aimed her flashlight at the wall. Nothing. Just the old, dirty fireplace and the bare, cracked wall above it. There is nothing, she said finally, but even her voice sounded empty. Maybe it was the shadow of the candle, Lucas added, but he didn't seem really convinced. Lucy pointed at the table. The pipe. It's gone. Amelia's gaze shifted to the spot where Lucas had placed the wooden pipe. The table was empty. Who took it? She asked, her voice tense. No one answered. After a short, heated argument, They agreed to search the room systematically. It was Lucas who pointed out a trapdoor in the floor, hidden beneath an old, worn rug. "Has this been here the whole time?" Daniel asked as Lucas opened the trapdoor. "Looks like it," Lucas said curtly. Below was a narrow, dark staircase leading down. A rancid smell rose to meet them, and Lucy turned away. "No, I'm not going down there. We need to know what's going on here," said Amelia, shining the flashlight into the depths. The steps were covered in dust, and cobwebs hung like curtains from the ceiling. "Great," muttered Daniel. "Exactly what we need. A creepy basement safari." Despite their fear, Amelia, Lucas, Daniel, and Sophie descended the steps. Lucy hesitated at the top, but kept the door open so they wouldn't be left completely in the dark. Below, they found a low room, its walls paneled with wood. In the center of the room stood a massive table, covered with papers, all marked with the same symbol, the spiral with arrows. "What is all this?" Lucas asked, picking up one of the papers. "It looks like rituals," Sophie said, scanning the texts. "Here it says something about sacrifices and summoning." "Summoning what?" Daniel asked, grabbing another sheet. "No idea," Sophie said, "but it doesn't sound good. Here it says that the Wanderer will only be spared if..." She paused, the color draining from her face. "If what?" Amelia urged. "If a life is given to save the others." The words hung in the air like a leaden weight. "This is nonsense," Daniel said loudly. "Some freaks wrote this. It's just a legend to scare people. But what if it's true?" Sophie whispered. When they returned to the living room, they found Lucy in a state of complete panic. She pointed at the windows, which were suddenly clear again. Outside, the storm was no longer visible, only an endless snowy landscape, bathed in an unnaturally cold blue. "What is that?" Lucas asked, staring outside. "I don't know," Lucy said. "It looks wrong." Suddenly, a sound echoed, a rhythmic, hollow whistling coming from somewhere outside. It was the same melody they had heard earlier, only now it was clearer, closer, and eerily familiar. "It's the pipe," Sophie whispered. Amelia ran to the door and threw it open. The wind had died down, but the cold was still unbearable. In the snow in front of the door were footprints, bare, naked feet, leading from the doorstep into the darkness. "This isn't possible," Lucas said. Maybe we should follow the tracks," Amelia suggested, but her voice betrayed her fear. "Are you crazy?" Daniel asked. "Out there. What if it's trying to lure us outside? So we stay here and wait until it comes in?" Amelia asked in return. The group looked at each other, unsure what to do next. The decision was taken from them when suddenly a loud bang echoed through the house. The fireplace, which had recently gone out, had reignited, and the flames danced higher than could be natural. In the firelight, a figure became visible. The man from the photo, the White Wanderer, stood there. His eyes were pitch black, and his smile was wide and unnatural. In one hand, he held a wooden pipe. In the other, a knife that seemed to be made of ice. "One of you," he said softly, but his voice echoed in their minds, "must pay." The students screamed as the Wanderer approached them. "Run," shouted Amelia, but Daniel stood frozen in place. "This isn't real," he said, though his voice faltered. The Wanderer stopped and pointed the pipe at him. "You," he said, "open the gate." "What?" Daniel recoiled. "I didn't do anything." Amelia grabbed his arm and pulled him toward the door. "We need to get out of here." But when she opened the door, there was only snow, endless, cold, and empty. The door slammed shut behind them with a thunderous bang before they could escape. Amelia turned around, her hand still tightly around Daniel's arm. The White Wanderer had vanished. Instead, the flames in the fireplace flickered, as if performing a wild dance, and the room seemed to have changed. The furniture was gone, the carpet was a single charred hole, and new messages appeared on the walls, etched as if by an invisible hand. "This isn't really happening," Lucy stammered, stumbling backward until she crashed into the wall. "It's real," said Sophie with a trembling voice. She pointed at the fireplace, where something was moving in the flames. It looked like a hand trying to reach out. "We need to get out of here." Lucas screamed and ran to the trapdoor. But when he tried to tear it open, there was nothing but bare wood underneath. The access to the cellar was gone, as if it had never existed. "We're trapped," Sophie whispered. "No, we're not," Amelia disagreed, frantically searching for an escape. "There's always a way." But the words sounded hollow. The house was alive. They could feel it in the air, in the ground beneath their feet, in the shadows that seemed to move despite the flickering flames. Daniel sank onto the sofa and buried his face in his hands. "It's my fault. I shouldn't have touched the pipe." "It's not your fault," Amelia said firmly, but Daniel shook his head. "Yes, it is," he murmured. I found it again upstairs. I put it back. Maybe I wanted to see what would happen." The others stared at him in horror. "You did what?" Lucas yelled, barely holding back his disbelief. "I thought it was just a stupid prank." Daniel stood up. His eyes glistened with tears. "How was I supposed to know any of this was real?" Before anyone could respond, the door of the mountain house began to vibrate, a sinister, muffled thumping that sounded like a heartbeat. Outside, the whistling started again, this time louder and faster, as if it were calling them. The muffled thumping of the door echoed through the mountain house, and the group froze. It wasn't knocking like before. It felt as though something heavy was being pressed against it, something inevitable. Amelia grabbed the nearest object, an iron bar she had taken from the half-collapsed kitchen. "Stay together," she whispered, positioning herself between the others and the door. The whistling outside became shriller, almost deafening, and then silence. "Maybe it's gone," Lucas said with a hopeful tone that no one shared. Suddenly, one of the windows shattered. A snowstorm blew in, cold and sharp as a knife, and with it came a figure. Not the White Wanderer, but something that moved like a black, humanoid silhouette. Snow seemed to cling to it, and its movements were jerky, unnatural. "What is that?" Sophie screamed as she stumbled backward against the wall. "Run!" Amelia shouted, but it was already too late. The creature was faster. It moved like a shadow, darting across the walls and floor, reaching Daniel before he could even react. He was yanked off his feet, and his scream echoed through the room. Lucas leapt forward, grabbing Daniel's arms and pulling him back, while Amelia struck with the iron bar. The creature recoiled, but seemed unfazed by their attack. "Upstairs!" Amelia shouted, and the group ran as fast as they could up the stairs. The shadow creature didn't follow them. It stayed below, motionless in the darkness, but its mere presence made the air in the house freeze. Upstairs, they slammed the bedroom door shut and shoved a heavy wardrobe in front of it. They all gasped for breath, their faces red from exertion and cold. "What was that?" Lucy finally asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. "No idea," said Lucas, still holding Daniel's arm as if he never wanted to let go. "It came from this house," said Sophie, sounding as though she was about to collapse. Maybe the Wanderer or something he brought with him. Stop thinking about it." Amelia snapped at her. "We need to find a way out. We can't stay here forever." Daniel, who had been silent up to that point, lifted his head. His eyes were glassy, and he seemed barely present. "It won't let us go," he murmured. "Don't talk nonsense," Amelia said, shaking him. "There's always a way." "However," said Daniel, "it only wants one thing." It said it. "One of us has to pay." The room became dead silent. No one dared to look at the others. "We won't give anyone up," Amelia finally said, but she could feel how difficult the words were to say. Lucas nodded slowly. "We fight together." After an hour of tense silence, in which they heard nothing but the howling of the wind and the occasional creaking of the house, they came up with a plan. They would try to overpower the creature and leave the house, no matter how dangerous it was outside. "We have no choice," said Amelia as she gripped the metal rod more tightly. "The thing won't stay down forever. It will come eventually." Lucas and Sophie nodded. Daniel sat motionless. His eyes stared at the closed door, as if he were looking through it. "Daniel, do you hear me?" asked Amelia. He slowly turned his head toward her, as if he had only understood her words after a moment. "Yes, I hear you. You stay with us? Understood?" Daniel nodded, but something in his gaze made Amelia nervous. When they descended the stairs again, the ground floor was dark. The creature was nowhere to be seen, but the cold was almost palpable. Their breaths turned into small clouds, and the floor beneath them crunched like ice. "Where is it?" whispered Sophie, her voice trembling. "Maybe it's gone," said Lucas hopefully. But when they reached the door that led outside, they knew the creature was still there. The door was frozen shut. Thick ice sheets covered the frame and the handle. "It won't let us out," said Lucy with a sob. Suddenly, the whistling started again, this time from everywhere. It echoed off the walls, an eerie melody that wouldn't end. And then the creature reappeared. It seemed to have grown larger, its shape more threatening, and its eyes, deep black holes, fixed on the group. It moved slowly, almost leisurely, as the whistling grew louder. "We have to fight," cried Amelia, swinging the metal rod. Lucas grabbed a piece of wood that had fallen from the fireplace, and Sophie held a broken bottle. But as the creature approached them, time seemed to stand still. The air in the mountain house seemed to freeze. As the creature drew nearer, Amelia swung the rod, but it passed right through the shadow, as if it were made of smoke. The thing stopped and slowly turned its head toward Daniel, who was standing behind the group, motionless like a statue. "Daniel, move!" screamed Amelia, but he didn't move. The creature took a step forward and then another, but it ignored the rest of the group completely. Instead, it stopped right in front of Daniel. "You," it said, its voice deep and hoarse like a gust of icy wind. "You understood?" "Understood," repeated Lucas, his voice trembling. "What are you talking about?" Daniel slowly lifted his head. His eyes were dark, and a sad, desperate smile was on his lips. "I knew it all along." "What did you know?" cried Amelia, but Daniel didn't respond. The creature handed Daniel the wooden pipe, and as he took it, he seemed to suddenly become clearer. His voice was firm but quiet. "It wants a sacrifice. It has wanted it all along. And I called it." "That's not true," screamed Sophie. "The house lured us all here. It's not your fault." "Yes," said Daniel. "I found it upstairs, the pipe. I knew it meant something, but I didn't stop. I wanted to know what would happen." "That's crazy," whispered Lucy. The creature turned to the group. "One must pay. The rest go free." "No," cried Amelia, stepping between Daniel and the figure. "There's no reason to sacrifice anyone. We'll find another way." "There is no other way," said the creature coldly. Daniel stepped forward and gently pushed Amelia aside. "Yes, there is." "What do you mean?" asked Lucas. But before Daniel could answer, he played the pipe. The shrill, eerie sound echoed through the house, freezing everyone in place. It wasn't just a sound. It was as if it were passing through them, shaking their bones and bringing their hearts to a halt. The creature paused. For a moment it seemed surprised, then nodded slowly. "You have chosen." "No," cried Amelia, trying to pull him back, but it was too late. The ground beneath Daniel's feet began to crackle. The ice seemed to close around him. His hands and arms were pulled upward by an invisible force, and a bright white light filled the room. "I opened the gate," said Daniel calmly, as the light surrounded him. "And now I will close it." "Daniel, no," screamed Amelia, but she couldn't reach him. The light grew brighter until it swallowed everything. When it faded, Daniel was gone. The group stood frozen in the sudden silence. The creature was gone, and with it, the cold, the darkness, and the supernatural terror. Is it over?" asked Sophie, her voice barely more than a whisper. Lucas nodded slowly. "I think so." Amelia sank to her knees and stared at the ground where Daniel had stood. A small, narrow imprint of his feet was the only thing that remained of him. Lucy sat beside her and placed a trembling hand on her shoulder. "He saved us. He didn't have to do that," Amelia murmured. "Yes, he did," Lucas finally said. "He did it so we could live." When they opened the door, the storm was over. The snow-covered landscape appeared peaceful, as if nothing had ever happened. The sky was clear, and the sun bathed the snow in a blinding light. The group silently descended the mountain. The mountain lodge grew smaller and more distant with each step, until it finally disappeared behind the trees. No one spoke until they reached the base of the camp. Mr. Edwards was standing outside, his forehead furrowed. "Where have you been? We've been searching for you everywhere." Amelia looked at him, wanting to say something, but the words stuck in her throat. How could she explain what had happened? "It was the storm," Lucas finally said. "We sought shelter." Edwards shook his head. "You should have stayed nearby. Are you all okay?" Amelia nodded, but inside, nothing felt okay. She still stood motionless as the others slowly walked down the mountain. The image of Daniel, surrounded by light, was etched indelibly in her mind. She turned once more to look at the mountain lodge, which stood like a silhouette in the blinding white of the snow. It looked so unremarkable, so harmless, but she knew that something dark, unfathomable was hidden there. "Amelia," Lucas' voice pulled her out of her thoughts. "Come on, we shouldn't look back." She swallowed hard and began to move. But with every step, she felt a growing sense of guilt in her chest. Daniel had sacrificed his life to save them. But why did she feel as if she had let him down? "He knew," she suddenly said, her voice soft and hoarse. "What do you mean?" asked Sophie. "Daniel knew that the mountain lodge wanted us. It had drawn him in from the first moment. Maybe he never had a choice." "It doesn't matter," said Lucas, looking at her intently. "He made the choice to save us, and we owe him our lives." Sophie nodded slowly, but Lucy remained silent. Finally, she whispered, "But why? Why did that thing want Daniel?" No one answered. The truth lay in the shadows of the house, and none of them had the courage to uncover it. When they reached the main building of the ski camp, it felt as though time hadn't moved. The other groups sat together, laughing and telling stories. No one seemed to notice that something unusual had happened. Mr. Edwards eyed them suspiciously as they approached. "You went through the storm? That was dangerous, and you're one short." Amelia searched for an explanation, but Lucas was quicker. "Daniel left just before the storm hit. We thought he had come back to you." Edwards furrowed his brow. "We haven't seen him. He must be stuck somewhere." "Yes," Lucas muttered firmly. The group retreated to the cabin they shared with other students. None of them spoke about what had happened. They knew no one would believe them. But that night, when everything was still, Amelia thought she heard something outside. It was a faint whistling, like a melody carried by the wind. In the morning, the camp seemed to have returned to a strange normalcy. The students had breakfast, joked, and prepared for another day in the snow. But for Amelia, Lucas, Sophie, and Lucy, everything felt different. The mountain lodge and Daniel's sacrifice weighed on them like an invisible burden. Amelia was the first to notice it. The lift operator seemed nervous, constantly glancing at the mountain station and speaking in hushed tones. When Amelia approached, She heard the words restricted area and search party. What's going on? She asked. One of the men, an older, weathered ski guide, shook his head. A boy has gone missing. Apparently last night. Daniel, Amelia whispered, feeling her heart race. The man looked at her in surprise. Do you know him? Was he with you? Amelia swallowed, then shook her head. I lost sight of him yesterday. The man studied her, but said nothing further. He turned away and continued discussing with his colleagues. As the other students prepared for the day, Amelia withdrew and gathered Lucas, Sophie, and Lucy in a secluded corner. They're looking for him, she said, but they won't find anything. We don't know that, Lucas said. Maybe he's out there somewhere. He's not, Sophie said quietly. We all know that. Lucy began to cry, and Amelia put her arm around her shoulders. We have to stay silent, she finally said. No one would believe us, and we could be in danger if we say too much. Lucas nodded slowly. Then we act as if nothing happened. In the afternoon, the four of them decided to ski down the main slope. It was an attempt to distract themselves, to find normalcy again, but the ride felt strange. The snow was too smooth, the air too still, and every shadow on the slope made them flinch. When they took the lift back to the mountain station, the sky began to darken. A light wind picked up, and the air grew colder. This doesn't feel right, Sophie said, gripping the gondola's handle tightly. It's just the weather, Lucas said, but his gaze was nervous. When they reached the top, they got out, but the platform was empty. No lift operator was in sight, and the doors to the station were open, as if someone had hastily left. Where's everyone? Asked Lucy. Maybe something happened, said Lucas. Or maybe the house hasn't let us go, said Sophie. Amelia turned around. The gondola they had ridden was still hanging on the cable, but it no longer moved. The other gondola on the cable, which was supposed to go down, was empty. But when the wind blew through the station, she swore she saw a silhouette inside. There's someone, she whispered. The others turned around and stared at the gondola. For a moment, everything was silent. Then the cable car began to move. The gondola slowly descended the slope, but the silhouette remained motionless. That's Daniel, Lucy suddenly said. That can't be, said Lucas. It is him. Lucy ran forward as if she wanted to follow him, but Amelia grabbed her and pulled her back. No, that's not Daniel, she shouted. It's the house. It's trying to bring us back. Suddenly, the station began to shake. The ground vibrated, and a deep, rumbling noise filled the air, like the echo of a whistle that resonated through the mountains. Run! Amelia screamed. The four of them ran to the next slope, but the snow beneath their feet seemed to move, holding them back. The wind howled around them, and in the distance, the mountain house reappeared, even though they thought they had left it behind. It's everywhere, Sophie said, panicked. We can't get away. Stop saying that, Lucas shouted, but his voice sounded desperate. As they ran down the slope, the snow around them began to melt, revealing a black, bottomless hole. It was as if the earth itself wanted to swallow them. We have to stick together, Amelia shouted. The group clung to each other and kept running until they finally reached the foot of the mountain. The snow normalized and silence returned. They turned around one last time, but the mountain house had disappeared and was never seen again.